My life had turned into an endless Groundhog Day. Every morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling that another meaningless day awaited me. The job that once brought satisfaction now seemed like a mere burden, a routine that sucked the life out of me. But things weren't any better at home. Sarah, my wife, and I were growing more distant from each other. Our conversations were reduced to discussing mundane, everyday things, and there was no talk of the former passion and attraction. I felt our marriage was falling apart at the seams, but I didn't know how to fix it. Is this it? Is this the adult life I dreamed of in my youth? I thought bitterly, wandering the streets after another hard day at the office. I was gnawed by the feeling that I had lost myself, my dreams and aspirations, as if I had turned into a cog in the system, a robot mindlessly performing its functions. Thoughts of dropping everything and starting life from scratch came to me more and more often. But how do you do that when you have a family, obligations, a mortgage? And would I have the courage for such drastic changes? I was distracted from these heavy thoughts by a phone call. I glanced at the screen. It was Elizabeth, my mother-in-law. We'd always gotten along great and often talked about various topics. She was a wise, well-read woman and often gave me sound advice. "Hey, Liz, good to hear from you," I answered, trying to sound cheerful. "Hello, Michael. I've got some free time, and I thought, how about we have a cup of coffee? Do you think you could break away?" my mother-in-law offered. The prospect of having a heart-to-heart talk with Elizabeth seemed enticing. After all, who else could understand and support me if not her? "Of course, Liz, I'd love to chat. Meet you at our usual cafe in an hour, okay?" "It's a deal. See you then," Elizabeth replied cheerfully, and hung up. I put the phone in my pocket and quickened my pace. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to share my feelings with someone, to pour out my soul. And who knows, maybe Elizabeth will be able to set my brain straight and make me look at my situation from a different angle? With these thoughts, I headed to our favorite cafe, anticipating a long and soulful conversation with my mother-in-law. Too bad I had no idea then what this rash decision would lead me to and what secrets I was about to uncover. Our meeting with Elizabeth went surprisingly well. Over a cup of fragrant cappuccino, we chatted for several hours, discussing everything under the sun, from the latest news to philosophical questions. I shared my doubts and worries with my mother-in-law, and she listened attentively and gave wise, balanced advice. "You know, Michael, a midlife crisis is normal," she said thoughtfully, stirring her coffee. "Every man sooner or later asks himself questions about the meaning of life, his purpose. The main thing is not to make rash decisions and remember what you have." I felt a little better with those words. Elizabeth seemed to have dispelled the fog in my head, given me hope that everything could still be fixed, and I was immensely grateful to her for that support. From that day on, we began to communicate more often. Lunch breaks, evening get-togethers at the cafe, long phone conversations. We used every opportunity to discuss what was on our minds. And the more time we spent together, the more attached I became to Elizabeth. She was an unusually attractive woman. Slender, elegant, with luxurious chestnut hair and lively brown eyes. Sometimes I caught myself admiring her a little longer than I should have, but then I would pull myself together. After all, this is my mother-in-law, my wife's mother. What frivolous thoughts could there be? However, gradually the line between friendship and something more began to blur. Our conversations became more personal, more intimate. We shared details of our lives that we didn't even share with our closest friends. And at some point I began to notice oddities in Elizabeth's behavior. She would casually touch my hand or give me a long, meaningful look. And once, when we were sitting on a park bench, she suddenly put her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I feel so calm with you, Michael. I can be myself." Her closeness made me feel hot. I wanted to hug Elizabeth, hold her close, kiss her so that the whole world would cease to exist. But I restrained myself, suppressing this impulse with an effort of will. "Liz, I should probably get going," I mumbled, awkwardly getting up from the bench. "Sarah will be worried." Elizabeth didn't reply, just smiled enigmatically. And that smile sent shivers down my spine. It was as if she knew my thoughts and feelings better than I did myself. All the way home, I cursed myself for my cowardice. How could I think of my mother-in-law in that way? After all, I love Sarah. We have a family, obligations to each other. But at the same time, memories of Elizabeth's touches, her mischievous smile, made my heart beat faster. It's just a silly infatuation, a sign of a midlife crisis, I kept telling myself. I need to stop communicating with Liz before it's too late. Otherwise, I might do something stupid. But it's easy to say and hard to do. Elizabeth seemed to be pulling me to her like a magnet, and it was getting harder to resist this attraction. My mind said one thing, but my heart said something else entirely, and I was afraid that soon this inner struggle would reach its apogee. It happened on one of the Friday evenings. Sarah had gone to a friend's house in a neighboring town for the weekend, and I was left home alone. The evening dragged on endlessly, and out of boredom, I decided to call Elizabeth. Just to chat, to take my mind off the oppressive thoughts. "Michael, what a pleasant surprise!" she rejoiced when she heard my voice. "I just opened a bottle of excellent wine and was going to while away the evening watching old movies. Would you like to keep me company?" That suggestion sent shivers down my spine. Being alone with Elizabeth, and with alcohol to boot, that's clearly a bad idea. But I couldn't refuse. "I'd love to, Liz," I squeezed out, feeling the blood rush to my cheeks. "I'll be at your place in half an hour." Elizabeth met me at the doorstep in a light silk robe that seductively hugged her slender figure. She exuded a subtle scent of perfume that was driving me crazy. "Come in. Make yourself comfortable," she smiled, taking my jacket. "The glasses are on the coffee table, and I'll go put on something more decent." With that, Liz disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sank heavily onto the couch, trying to calm my pounding heart. I needed to get a grip, distract myself, think about anything but my mother-in-law in a seductive robe. Elizabeth returned a few minutes later in a form-fitting dress that accentuated all the merits of her figure. She gracefully sat down on the couch next to me and reached for her glass. "Well, here's to our meeting," she winked, clinking glasses with me. The wine was strong and tart. It pleasantly burned my throat and almost immediately went to my head. We chatted about trivial things, laughed, shared our impressions of the movie we had watched. But beneath this carefree chatter, I could feel the growing tension. At some point there was an awkward pause. We fell silent, looking into each other's eyes. The air seemed to be electrified, thick and viscous. I could see Elizabeth's chest rising and falling, her eyelashes fluttering, and then the world simply ceased to exist. I don't remember who reached for the other first. I only remember that the next moment we were already kissing greedily, like starving lovers. All thoughts of the wrongness of what was happening flew out of my head, giving way to a wild, unbridled passion. "Michael, I've wanted this for so long," Elizabeth moaned, running her fingers through my hair. "You're driving me crazy." "Me too, Liz. God, I want you so much," I croaked, covering her neck and collarbones with kisses. Everything that followed was like in a fog. Clothes flew to the sides, exposing bodies burning with desire. We caressed each other frantically, furiously, as if afraid it was just a dream. The bed creaked under the onslaught of our bodies, and the air filled with our moans and sighs. It was the most fantastic night of my life. Elizabeth turned out to be an incredible lover, uninhibited, passionate, insatiable. It was as if she knew all my secret desires and fantasies, and was happy to bring them to life. When it was over, we collapsed exhausted on the pillows, wet with sweat and sweetly languishing. Consciousness slowly returned to me, and with it, the full weight of realizing what had happened. "Oh my God, what have we done?" I groaned, covering my face with my hands. "How could I do this to Sarah, to our family?" Elizabeth propped herself up on her elbow and looked me in the eye. There wasn't a shred of remorse in her gaze, only sated satisfaction and undisguised triumph. "Michael, don't torture yourself. What happened is beautiful, and I don't regret anything," she purred, tracing a finger across my chest. "We both wanted this, so why pretend?" I swallowed hard. There was some truth in Elizabeth's words. It's foolish to deny the obvious. The attraction between us was mutual and strong, and now that the dam had burst, there was no turning back. "So what do we do now?" I asked helplessly, staring at the ceiling. "What about Sarah, our marriage? I won't be able to lie to her, but I can't tell her the truth either." Elizabeth sighed and pressed herself against me with her whole body. This closeness sent shivers down my skin again, and my groin grew treacherously heavy. "For now, we don't have to do anything," she said resolutely. But at the same time, memories of Elizabeth's touches, her mischievous smile, made my heart beat faster. It's just a silly infatuation, a sign of a midlife crisis, I kept telling myself. I need to stop communicating with Liz before it's too late. Otherwise, I might do something stupid. But it's easy to say and hard to do. Elizabeth seemed to be pulling me to her like a magnet, and it was getting harder to resist this attraction. My mind said one thing, but my heart said something else entirely. And I was afraid that soon this inner struggle would reach its apogee. It happened on one of the Friday evenings. Sarah had gone to a friend's house in a neighboring town for the weekend, and I was left home alone. The evening dragged on endlessly, and out of boredom, I decided to call Elizabeth, just to chat, to take my mind off the oppressive thoughts. "Michael, what a pleasant surprise," she rejoiced when she heard my voice. "I just opened a bottle of excellent wine and was going to while away the evening watching old movies. Would you like to keep me company?" That suggestion sent shivers down my spine. Being alone with Elizabeth, and with alcohol to boot, that's clearly a bad idea. But I couldn't refuse. "I'd love to, Liz," I squeezed out, feeling the blood rush to my cheeks. "I'll be at your place in half an hour." Elizabeth met me at the doorstep in a light silk robe that seductively hugged her slender figure. She exuded a subtle scent of perfume that was driving me crazy. "Come in, make yourself comfortable," she smiled, taking my jacket. "The glasses are on the coffee table, and I'll go put on something more decent." With that, Liz disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sank heavily onto the couch, trying to calm my pounding heart. I needed to get a grip, distract myself, think about anything but my mother-in-law in a seductive robe. Elizabeth returned a few minutes later in a form-fitting dress that accentuated all the merits of her figure. She gracefully sat down on the couch next to me and reached for her glass. "Well, here's to our meeting," she winked, clinking glasses with me. The wine was strong and tart. It pleasantly burned my throat and almost immediately went to my head. We chatted about trivial things, laughed, shared our impressions of the movie we had watched. But beneath this carefree chatter, I could feel the growing tension. At some point there was an awkward pause. We fell silent, looking into each other's eyes. The air seemed to be electrified, thick and viscous. I could see Elizabeth's chest rising and falling, her eyelashes fluttering. And then the world simply ceased to exist. I don't remember who reached for the other first. I only remember that the next moment we were already kissing greedily, like starving lovers. All thoughts of the wrongness of what was happening flew out of my head, giving way to a wild, unbridled passion. "Michael, I've wanted this for so long," Elizabeth moaned, running her fingers through my hair. "You're driving me crazy." "Me too, Liz. God, I want you so much," I croaked, covering her neck and collarbones with kisses. Everything that followed was like in a fog. Clothes flew to the sides, exposing bodies burning with desire. We caressed each other frantically, furiously, as if afraid it was just a dream. The bed creaked under the onslaught of our bodies, and the air filled with our moans and sighs. It was the most fantastic night of my life. Elizabeth turned out to be an incredible lover, uninhibited, passionate, insatiable. It was as if she knew all my secret desires and fantasies and was happy to bring them to life. When it was over, we collapsed exhausted on the pillows, wet with sweat and sweetly languishing. Consciousness slowly returned to me, and with it, the full weight of realizing what had happened. "Oh my God, what have we done?" I groaned, covering my face with my hands. "How could I do this to Sarah, to our family?" Elizabeth propped herself up on her elbow and looked me in the eye. There wasn't a shred of remorse in her gaze, only sated satisfaction and undisguised triumph. "Michael, don't torture yourself. What happened is beautiful, and I don't regret anything," she purred, tracing a finger across my chest. "We both wanted this, so why pretend?" I swallowed hard. There was some truth in Elizabeth's words. It's foolish to deny the obvious. The attraction between us was mutual and strong, and now that the dam had burst, there was no turning back. "So what do we do now?" I asked helplessly, staring at the ceiling. "What about Sarah, our marriage? I won't be able to lie to her, but I can't tell her the truth either." Elizabeth sighed and pressed herself against me with her whole body. This closeness sent shivers down my skin again, and my groin grew treacherously heavy. "For now, we don't have to do anything," she said resolutely. This will remain our secret. You hear me? Neither Sarah nor anyone else needs to know. And we'll just enjoy what we have, here and now." And before I could object, Elizabeth pressed her lips to mine in a demanding kiss, rekindling the fire of desire in me. All good intentions instantly evaporated, dissolved in this mad whirlpool of passion. In the morning, I woke up completely broken. My head was splitting, and my mouth tasted like cats had taken a dump in it. Elizabeth was sleeping peacefully beside me, proprietarily throwing her arm over me. The sight of her naked body was both thrilling and causing a rush of acute shame. Carefully, trying not to wake my lover, I climbed out of bed and began to get dressed. I was shaking with horror and disgust at myself. How could I have stooped so low as to sleep with my own mother-in-law? God, what kind of person am I? "Already running away?" came Elizabeth's mocking voice from behind me. She propped herself up on her elbows and watched my thrashing mischievously. "Liz, what happened? It was a terrible mistake. A momentary lapse, nothing more," I blurted out, avoiding looking her in the eye. "I love Sarah, and I can't do this to her. We better pretend nothing happened and forget about everything." Elizabeth's cheeks flushed with angry blush, and her eyes flared with unkind fire. She jerked up from the bed, not even bothering to cover her nakedness. "So that's how it is? Used and discarded, huh?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "Had your fun and decided to go back to your faithful wife? Oh no, Michael, you won't get rid of me that easily." She swooped up to me and dug her nails painfully into my forearm. Her eyes were burning with a crazy gleam, and I involuntarily backed away. "Listen to me, lover boy. You're mine now, and just try to run away. I'll tell everyone about our little affair. I'm sure Sarah will be thrilled to find out how her hubby is having fun with Mommy." I was horrified. Not that. If Sarah finds out the truth, it's over. She'll never forgive me for such a betrayal, and with her own mother at that. And the children? God, they'll suffer too. Lose a full-fledged family. "Don't, Liz. I'm begging you, don't drag Sarah and the kids into this," I pleaded, ready to fall to my knees in front of her. "You don't want to destroy our family, do you?" Elizabeth laughed, wickedly and heart-rendingly. There was not a hint of mirth in that laughter, only bitterness and malicious triumph. "Our family? What do you know about family, Michael? Do you think I don't see how unhappy you are with Sarah? How your marriage is falling apart? And I can give you what you want. Passion, understanding, true love. You just have to trust me." With those words, she pulled me to her and pressed her lips to mine in a hard kiss. I groaned, feeling my body respond to her caress against my will. My head was spinning and dark spots danced before my eyes. "That's it, my dear. Just relax and enjoy it," Elizabeth whispered, tipping me onto the bed. And I gave in. I cast off the last shreds of shame and common sense, allowed myself to be drawn into this madness. After all, isn't lust one of the 7 deadly sins? So why not immerse myself in it completely, since I've already fallen? From that day on, our secret affair began. We met at every opportunity, coming up with more and more excuses and justifications. Lying became my second eye, a constant companion eating away at my soul like acid. But I couldn't give up Elizabeth either. I was too deeply mired in this story. After that fateful night, my life was finally split into 2 halves. One, the one that is visible, where I am an exemplary family man and a loving husband. The second, hidden from everyone, full of sin and forbidden passion. Elizabeth and I became lovers. Now there was no point in denying the obvious or fighting temptation. I simply accepted my depravity as a given and gave myself up to the whirlpool of blinding, all-consuming desire. We met as often as we could. Fortunately, there were plenty of reasons and opportunities. After all, a connection with a mother-in-law has its advantages. You can always refer to some family affairs, the need to discuss or decide something. And while at first Sarah was surprised by my zeal to visit her mother, she soon got used to it and stopped asking questions. But it didn't get any easier. Every time I kissed my wife, held her close in our marital bed, I felt like I was being cut with a rusty knife. Lies, pretense, duplicity, it all went against my very nature. But there was no choice. Elizabeth kept me on a short leash, threatening to reveal our secret if I misbehaved. I tried to take from this relationship the only thing I could, physical pleasure. Fortunately, in this aspect, my mother-in-law and I were a perfect match. Elizabeth was insatiable in bed, inventive and uninhibited. I promise everything will work out soon. Sarah sniffled and buried her nose in my chest. I stroked her head, feeling the guilt eating away at me. God, is this what I call covering my tracks? I'm just the most unconscionable liar and scoundrel in the world. Meanwhile, things weren't going smoothly with Elizabeth either. My mother-in-law was becoming more and more demanding and capricious, throwing jealous tantrums at me every now and then. As soon as I was late from work or didn't answer the phone, she would throw a fit. "Oh, so that's how it is. Ran off to your wife, did you? Found someone younger and more compliant? Of course, why would you need an old and boring mother-in-law? What, you think I don't see how you look at young secretaries?" All my attempts to calm Elizabeth down and assure her of my fidelity were shattered against a wall of her paranoia and resentment. And after the quarrels followed passionate sex, the kind that made sparks fly from my eyes. It seemed that Elizabeth deliberately provoked conflicts in order to prove her rights to me with redoubled passion afterwards. I was completely worn out, torn between two fires, not knowing how to please both sides. I felt like I was going crazy, that this situation would simply crush me. I had to do something, and urgently. In desperation, I even thought about confessing everything to Sarah, to beg for forgiveness in tears, to swear that it would never happen again. After all, what's the value of our marriage vows if they're built on lies? But fear tied my tongue. The fear of losing my wife, children, familiar life. The fear that Sarah would hate me and never forgive me. And, to be honest, the animal fear of Elizabeth. I could already physically feel what this woman was capable of in anger. This couldn't go on forever. Sooner or later the tension would reach its limit and a storm would break out. The only question was how much longer this house of cards would hold up, and who would be the first to dare to pull the tablecloth. The denouement came from an unexpected quarter. One unremarkable day, my wife and I went to the mall to buy some clothes. Sarah was not herself, distracted, pensive, as if her head was in the clouds. She kept running off somewhere and disappearing for a long time. I was at a loss as to what had come over her, but I didn't dare to ask. I myself was not in the best shape after another rendezvous with Elizabeth the night before. And so, when I was standing in the fitting room, trying on how the new jeans fit me, the door swung open sharply. There stood a pale Sarah, and behind her back, oh my God, Elizabeth in the flesh, with disheveled hair and a flushed face. She was clutching my phone in her hand. Apparently she had stolen it while I was changing, and I guessed with horror what exactly my mother-in-law had discovered there. "Here, take a look, daughter," Elizabeth spat out angrily, shoving my cell phone under Sarah's nose. "Read what love text messages your hubby writes to me. Now do you understand why he's constantly hanging out at my place?" Sarah's lips trembled. Tears stood in her eyes. Unbelievingly, as if not wanting to accept the obvious, she ran her eyes over the screen, and then she turned her gaze to me, full of pain, anger, and disgust. "Michael, is it true? You and my mother? My God, I don't believe it. How could you? How could you both do this to me?" She burst into screams, sobbing out loud. Shocked shoppers began to turn to us, whispering, and I stood as if stunned, unable to utter a word. All my carefully constructed bastions of lies over these months had collapsed in an instant like a house of cards. "Sarah, honey, let me explain everything," I finally squeezed out, taking a step toward my wife. But she recoiled from me as if from a leper. Her face was distorted in a grimace of pain and disgust. "Don't touch me! Don't you dare come near me! You, both of you, you're just monsters! You've ruined my whole life!" With those words, Sarah spun around and ran away. I rushed after her, trying to catch up, to calm her down, to beg for forgiveness. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Elizabeth's contorted face. She seemed not to have expected such a reaction from her daughter. All her triumph had been blown away, leaving only a bewildered, deflated woman. But I didn't care anymore. Now only Sarah existed for me, and the threat of losing her forever. I raced after my wife, pushing aside indignant people, shouting her name. But Sarah didn't even look back. She was flying away, running away from this nightmare. In the parking lot, my wife jumped into the car and, screeching her tires, took off. And I just stood there, watching the receding lights and feeling my world crumble. At that moment, I felt only emptiness and endless, hopeless despair. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Elizabeth catching up with me, trying to catch her breath. A whole storm of emotions could be read on her face: guilt, anger, confusion. "Michael, I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I didn't think Sarah would react so sharply," she stammered. I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm tired of being your toy, your secret mistress." I silently looked at her, feeling some kind of devastating fatigue. That's it. Over. Finita la commedia, as the Italians say. "This is the end, Liz. You got what you wanted. You destroyed my family. I hope you're happy." Elizabeth shrank, angry tears glistening in her eyes. She was saying something, explaining, justifying herself, but I wasn't listening anymore. I turned and trudged away, stumbling and not watching where I was going. I needed to be alone, to think about how to live on, if it was even worth living after something like this. I got home on autopilot. The lights were out in the windows. Not a sound came from behind the door. Had Sarah not come back at all? Or worse, had she taken the kids and left? Shaking with fear, I turned the key in the lock and walked in. Sarah was sitting on the couch in the living room, gloomy, with red eyes. When she saw me, she got up and, crossing her arms over her chest, said acidly, "The children are at my sister's. I told them that Daddy had an urgent business trip. I don't want them to see our divorce." My legs almost gave way. Divorce. That word lashed out like a slap in the face. Was Sarah really determined? "Honey, listen, I'll explain everything," I said hoarsely, trying to find the words. "Forgive me, for God's sake. I'm so guilty before you. It was a mistake, a momentary insanity. The devil made me do it. But Sarah just shook her head. There was so much pain and resentment in her eyes that I felt physically sick. It was the first time I had seen my wife like this, cold, distant, adamant. "Enough, Michael. You broke my heart, betrayed our vows. And with whom? With my own mother. I will never be able to forgive and forget that." She resolutely headed for the door. She stopped at the threshold and, without turning around, threw, "Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce. Don't try to dissuade me or stop me. This is my final decision." The door slammed, and I was left alone, in an echoing, empty apartment, in my life that had been cut to pieces. At that moment I suddenly realized with piercing clarity, it was all my fault. With my own hands, I had destroyed what I had. And how to live with it now, God only knows. The following days passed as if in a fog. I don't remember well what happened. Everything merged into one pitch-black nightmare. Sarah did indeed file for divorce, not even wanting to discuss the terms or the property. She just wanted to get rid of me as soon as possible, to cross me out of her life. The children took the news of their father's departure with bewilderment and resentment. It was especially hard for my son. He kept asking where I had gone and when I would be back, and I couldn't even find the strength to look him in the eye after everything that had happened. I hardly ate or slept, lost track of the days. Life had lost all meaning. There was no purpose, no incentive to continue existing. Even at work, things were going from bad to worse. I couldn't concentrate. I was constantly in the clouds. The bosses were already looking at me with clear disapproval. There was no news from Sarah. She ignored my calls and messages, avoided any contact. I understood that I had to give her time, not pressure or bother her. But the pain and longing for my family tore my soul apart. Elizabeth and I stopped communicating too. Now that the secret was out, we had nothing in common. And what kind of communication could there be after everything that happened? The feelings had ebbed away, leaving only awkwardness and a bitter aftertaste. Weeks went by, and I sank deeper and deeper into apathy and despondency. My friends tried to cheer me up, to get me out, but I just brushed them off. I didn't want to see anyone, to talk to anyone. I just wanted to crawl into a corner and howl quietly from the hopelessness. One evening, sitting in the semi-dark living room and staring blankly at the wall, I suddenly felt that I couldn't go on like this anymore. I couldn't continue this miserable, meaningless existence. I had to do something. Somehow try to fix what could still be fixed. I resolutely got up and, going to the mirror, firmly looked my reflection in the eyes. Yes, I had made a terrible mistake. I had betrayed my beloved wife, destroyed my family, hurt the people I held most dear. But there had to be a way to make things right. One mistake couldn't just erase all the good things that had been between Sarah and me. I remembered how we first met, at a college party. How we fell in love with each other at first sight. Couldn't take our eyes off each other, couldn't get enough of each other. Our first kiss, our first night together, our wedding, the birth of our children, all the bright and pure things we had created over the years. Was it all for nothing? Could one mistake, one misstep really destroy a whole life? No, I refused to believe it. I have to get my family back, I said out loud, looking my reflection in the eye. No matter what it takes, I'll grovel on my knees, beg for forgiveness, swear eternal fidelity. If only Sarah would believe me, if only she'd give me one more chance. And I set to work. I started by staging a real siege. I showered Sarah with flowers and gifts, stood guard at her apartment door for days on end. I begged for a meeting, for a chance to explain everything. At the same time, I completely redesigned my life. I threw myself into work, joined a gym, started seeing a therapist. I needed to prove to Sarah that I had realized my mistakes and was ready to change. At first, my wife was adamant. She slammed the door in my face, threw the flowers in the trash. Before my eyes, she smashed our wedding photos to smithereens. But I didn't give up. I kept fighting, giving it my all. I felt that if I retreated now, I would lose Sarah forever. I don't know what eventually worked. Perhaps my persistence, or perhaps our former love, which still smoldered in Sarah's heart. But gradually the ice began to melt. My wife no longer hid from me, agreed to talk, albeit coldly and detached, but at least she listened. And one day everything changed. Sarah called me herself and asked to meet. My heart skipped a beat. Had something happened to the children? But when I rushed to the cafe, I saw before me a calm and even serene wife. "Michael, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," she began, looking me straight in the eye. "About our relationship, about your infidelity, about our family. And I realized one thing. Despite all the pain you caused me, I still love you." It was as if a mountain had fallen from my shoulders. Was not all lost? Would Sarah be able to forgive me? "Of course it still hurts, and I probably won't ever be able to forget your act," my wife continued. "But I see how hard you're trying to make things right. I see that you're truly remorseful. And I thought, is it worth destroying our family? Throwing away everything we've created because of one mistake?" I couldn't believe my ears. Tears of relief and gratitude welled up in my eyes. I was ready to fall to my knees before Sarah. "Honey, my love, you can't even imagine how happy I am to hear this," I breathed, taking her hand. "I swear to you I will atone for my guilt. I will be the best husband and father in the world. I will never again give you a reason to doubt me." Sarah smiled weakly, and that smile warmed my heart. How I had missed her, my kind, wise, understanding wife. "Well then, let's try to start all over again," she said softly. "Only this time without half-truths and secrets, okay? We need to learn to trust each other again." I nodded fervently, unable to speak. This was more than I could have dreamed of. A second chance, an opportunity to atone for my mistakes and get my family back. I vowed to myself that everything would be different now. No more lies, no more affairs, only love, fidelity, and caring for my loved ones. We had a long and difficult road ahead of us. We had to rebuild our relationship, learn to forgive and trust. But I knew I could do it. Together with Sarah, we would overcome everything. As for Elizabeth, it was impossible to cross out what had happened once and for all. But we were able to transfer our relationship to a different plane. Just relatives, nothing more. At family gatherings, I would only politely say hello to my former mistress, avoiding being alone with her. The only time we had a heart-to-heart talk was a year after the scandal, at Sarah's cousin's wedding anniversary. It was a beautiful summer evening, with the guests laughing and cheering, and we happened to be sitting next to each other on the veranda, away from other people's eyes. "So, you and my daughter are back together?" Elizabeth said blandly, looking at me intently. I must admit, I didn't expect her to be able to forgive. I stared silently into the distance, at the green hills drowning in the setting sun. How much water had flowed in that time? How many things had happened? "Yes, we managed to keep the family together," I finally answered. "It was hard, but it was worth it. For Sarah and the children, I would do anything." Elizabeth nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Deep down, I'm glad I did," she confessed suddenly. "You and Sarah were always a great couple. It's a shame that I'm sorry for what happened. Forgive me if you can." I glanced at my former lover in surprise. I never thought I would hear such words from her. "I wanted to say thank you too," I said after a pause. "For not putting a stick in our wheels. letting us figure it out on our own. Elizabeth smiled sadly, and something like regret flashed in her eyes. Or was it just a play of light? You know, I've been rethinking a lot of things during this time too, she said quietly, fixing a loose curl. Realized how stupid I was being. You can't build happiness on the misfortune of others, and our passion, well, it's a good thing I got burned. I can't say. We were silent for a moment, thinking of our own things. Then Elizabeth suddenly laughed, lightly and easily, as in the good old days. Do you remember how dashing we used to be? It was hot, I'll tell you that. I'm sorry, but no one else has ever shown me such numbers in bed. I smiled involuntarily and blushed slightly. Oh yes, but in that respect we had nothing to complain about. There was plenty of passion to go around. We laughed, remembering the particularly racy moments of our affair. I felt light and calm, as if now, when all the secret was revealed, there was no need to pretend and hide the past. It had just been, and gone. We had learned our lesson and moved on. Elizabeth sighed and, casting a sly glance at me, winked. Still, that was pretty cool, huh, Casanova? Maybe we could do an encore sometime. I froze, chilled by the audacity of her suggestion. Just like that again, for old time's sake? No, no way. I've had enough of experiments. I've had enough. Apparently, my eloquent glance told Elizabeth what I thought better than any words. She laughed merrily and clapped me on the shoulder. I'm kidding. Relax, relative. That's it. Get over it. Live happily ever after with my daughter, and I'll manage somehow, don't worry. With these words, she winked dashingly and, turning around, clomped her heels away. I stood there looking at her and feeling a strange mixture of relief, sadness, and gratitude. Yes, we had traveled a difficult path with all its mistakes, offenses, and trials. But now I realized that it had been worth it. After all, it is by overcoming difficulties and temptations that we learn to appreciate what we have, and we come out of any trouble hardened, wise, ready to preserve and protect our happiness. I took a deep breath of clean evening air, cast a last glance at the departing silhouette of my former lover, and then I turned and went back to the house, to the place where my wife, my children, my real family were waiting for me, my newfound life. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.